Yes, it has happened. Again. Another day, another mass murder. Notice I say murder, not shooting. The white supremacists love to try to make hay out of Chicago because there was a mass shooting where no one was killed, usually gangbangers fighting over turf. Meanwhile, they totally ignore the mass murders perpetrated by all these white supremacists. So, yet again, another Fox News viewer has gone on a rampage. Well, between the mass murders and bombing plots and conspiracies to storm the Capitol, I'm starting to lose track of all their exploits.
This time, the scene of what appears to have been an act of domestic terrorism was a supermarket in Buffalo, New York. A white teenager, a boy really, only 18, wearing body armor and carrying an assault rifle, opened fire at a supermarket in an African-American neighborhood.
Now, you see what Chuck Todd did there? Calling him a boy, really. He's 18 freaking years old enough to vote, old enough to join the army, and to be given the death penalty. But when the criminal is white, the white media always tries to portray them as being innocent children, just innocent little babes who just didn't know any better, unless they're black, in which case, well, they're the product of a bad home. You know how these people are. He knew exactly what he was doing. There's no need to ask what demographic the murderer in Buffalo was. And why is that? Because white supremacist gunmen are protected. They're protected by the politicians, protected by the white media, and most of all, protected by the police, the prosecutors, and the courts. This is the system working exactly the way that it was designed. White immunity from law is the core of white supremacy. This time around, the murderer is Payton Gendron, an 18-year-old who drove 3 hours, over 200 miles, from his all-white enclave to the other side of the state of New York, just so he could find a place that had some black people in it. In this case, a grocery store. And if that at all sounds familiar, it should, because that's exactly what another race killer, Gregory Bush, did in 2018. He had originally tried to ambush a black church in Jeffersontown, Kentucky, but that church, having learned from the Charleston church massacre 3 years earlier, had their doors locked and wouldn't let him in. So this animal's plan had been to try to copy Dylann Roof's massacre at a black church, but the congregation was on code, so the white race terrorist, having failed to attack his original target, instead went to a nearby Kroger's and killed 2 black customers there. He tried the crazy defense, but that didn't work, and last year Biden's Department of Justice gave him a plea deal in which he was sentenced to life in prison plus 10 years, as opposed to the death penalty, which, if they had gone ahead and done their jobs and actually taken this to trial, is what he would have gotten. On a side note, Gregory Bush's ex-wife was black, and he had a history of domestic violence with her. But this latest race massacre in Buffalo also bears a resemblance to another mass shooter, Kyle Rittnehouse, a teenager who calls upon himself to drive long distances, deliberately going to a specific location with the intent of shooting people, with race at the center of it all. Gendron bragged about how reading anti-black propaganda on 4chan made him determined to carry out an anti-black race attack. He also said he would post his mass murder video on 4chan, which you'll recall is the same website that was the hub for the Minneapolis terrorist who attacked Black Lives Matter after the murder of Jamar Clark. And the white supremacists from 4chan, their terrorist attack also took place in 2015, only a few months after Dylann Roof's rampage. So 2015 was a busy year for the race terrorists. They spent a lot of time on 4chan too, bragging to their pals that they were going to take their guns and force the protesters to disperse. Also, for the record, one of the Minneapolis 4chan terrorists was a white Latino named Julio Suarez. He was on one of those videos holding up a gun saying, "Stay white." And another of the 4chan Minneapolis terrorists, Daniel Macy, he was Asian. But you had the white supremacist authorities up in Minneapolis who were on code for each other. And because of that, the guy who they tried to claim was the only one who was shooting at people, you have at least 5 counts of attempted murder, and they decided to instead say, well, 15 years should be enough for him. And the others, they got a slap on the wrist with probation. By the way, the DA who handled those miscarriages of justice was Mike Freeman, the same DA from Hennepin County who tried to protect Derek Chauvin and the other murderers of George Floyd. And like the other mass killers and mass shooters, like Dylann Roof and Kyle Rittnehouse, this Gendron animal, he didn't dare go to the proverbial hood where he claimed all these mean old black people were at. He didn't go where these supposed roughest and most lawless of black people would be at. Instead, just like Dylann Roof and Kyle Rittnehouse and the 4chan terrorist in Minneapolis, this latest white terrorist went somewhere where he knew the people wouldn't be armed and wouldn't be expecting to get ambushed. The white supremacists are all cowards. That's why they're ultimately going to lose. They don't have any guts. But just like Rittnehouse and Dylann Roof, this isn't the first time that this Gendron character has been in trouble with the law. Just last year, police were called to his high school because Gendron had been telling his classmates that he was going to carry out a school shooting, either at graduation or even after, kind of like Nicholas Cruz down in Florida. You notice how I'm doing all this name dropping just to understand all this behavior is linked. These are not just separate, isolated freak incidents. But just like Kyle Rittnehouse and the Michigan school shooter, when this guy was caught in plenty of time to prevent him from carrying out some act of carnage, what did they do? They did nothing. Now, if he had been black, he would have been marched out of the school immediately in handcuffs and expelled and had a case put on him. But he's not black, he's white. And as we've seen time and time again, the authorities will do nothing. This obsession with coddling and pampering these murders is a grave sickness of American society. It encourages this kind of carnage. This is why the FBI said that the white supremacists are the #1 national security threat facing the United States. But you wouldn't know it by how the white media and the white government reacts, or should I say by how they don't react. They always immediately move to minimize these race killer attacks, to push the line that it's always a lone wolf, or as Chuck Todd and the white media do, try to sanitize the guy, try to pretty him up, say that he's just a boy. And before the bodies are even cold, they're already saying that no one else was involved, and the investigation's going to stop with the shooter. There's nothing else to see here. These mass killings are collusion and murder by the state. It's also being exploited for personal gain by both the political parties as well. The white right's comments on this latest race massacre are as putrid as they are predictable. They're doing the usual script whenever this happens. But what about Chicago? Guns don't kill people. People do, and 2 of the victims were white, so that means he wasn't a white supremacist, even though there's video of him during the rampage seeing a white man who was cowering behind one of the cashier aisles, and the guy looks at him and goes, sorry, before he moves on. Doesn't shoot him. As soon as he realizes, oh, this is a white guy, I'm not shooting him. So no, just because Payton Gendron's aim was as defective as his morality doesn't mean he gets a pass on being a white supremacist. We're not allowing that kind of rewriting of history. And speaking of defective morals, New York Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik went on Twitter and said that she was praying for law enforcement at this time. And she made it a point to not even mention the victims in Buffalo. All she said was, saddened to hear the tragic news in Buffalo. But she did make sure to say we're praying for the entire community and law enforcement at this time. Yeah, this is all lives matters, that was she was saying, except she doesn't say black at all. This is being strident and blatant about the anti-black racism, which everybody understands from the Republican Party. This is more of their typical performative extremism. Doing this extreme racism as political theater. This is part of their party brand and has been their brand for decades now. No cops were hurt or even inconvenienced in all of this. Why mention the police at all? Obviously a backhanded dig at the murder victims by making it excruciatingly clear she doesn't even care about them. She's not even going to mention them. Black, not mention that at all. Victims of the shooting, she doesn't say anything about victims at all. Nothing about victims, nothing about the dead. She's talking about it as if there had been a car wreck or perhaps a tornado passed through. There was some property damage to somebody's store. This is the psychopathically racist virtue signaling of the white right. And when she predictably got called out for it on Twitter, she immediately posted another post. This time it was one short sentence pretending to mourn for the tragic, horrible loss of life in Buffalo. And then she dedicates an entire paragraph to pointing out that it's National Police Week and we must thank and honor our law enforcement and first responders in skyrocketing violent crimes. No mention of white supremacy, no mention of condemning white supremacy, condemning race hate at all. She talks as if it has nothing to do with that. In fact, she speaks in terms so vague, if you did not know specifically what had happened, you would have no clue what she was even referring to. Now, of course, this is standard for the GOP. They are the party of racism. They are the party of white supremacy, at least blatant, open white supremacy. They do this all the time to the point that it's not even necessary to make a big deal of their overt racism because that's their political brand. Their voters and supporters understand exactly what kind of racist code this is, and they approve of it. Stefanik herself is currently getting dragged as people remind her of how she bought Facebook ads for herself last year and used the so-called Great Replacement theory that prompted yesterday's massacre as a talking point in those same Facebook ads. As Steve Bannon said, they wear the title of racist as a badge of honor. This race killer Gendron certainly did. In his manifesto, he boasted and bragged about being a white supremacist. The very thing that those on the white right feebly try to claim that nobody identifies as. But the white left is also playing games with this tragedy too. They're using it as nothing more than a segue to mention their own personal issues, mostly abortion. Black people are being gunned down, and to the white left, it's all about mostly white women's access to abortion. Either that or it's about another of their pet issues, gun control. Sure, they give a passing mention, blink and you'll miss it mention, to how white supremacists are the biggest national security threat to the country, but none of them are saying we need to deal with that. None of them are saying there need to be laws and a dedicated national task force. In fact, a task force in every state dedicated solely to identifying, arresting, and incarcerating white supremacists before they strike. But then again, when you consider that even the FBI had to admit in 2006 that American law enforcement is totally infested with white supremacists all the way up to the police chiefs and the sheriffs, and even higher than that, well, it makes sense why a white supremacist task force would be a no-starter. You'd have to start by getting rid of all the white supremacists in law enforcement before you could have them go after the ones who don't wear uniforms. Before any of you Democrat shills come whining about how this is the reason black people have to vote for the Democrats, listen up, you half-wits. There were no Democrats yesterday or today who were talking about going after these white supremacists at all. They weren't talking about going after anyone. None of these Democrat politicians, mouthpieces, talking heads, or spokespeople were saying a peep about what should be done or what they were going to do to wage war on white supremacist trash like the Gendron character who committed this abomination. All the Democrat politicians are saying is, these Republicans openly approve of anti-black violence, now go vote for us. Yeah, because Democrats believe in silently approving anti-black violence. It's not enough to point out to me that there's some virulently racist person on the right. I need to know what you're going to do about it. These Democrats are not saying they're going to do anything. Where's the anti-white supremacy law that they're going to pass? Hell, where's even a proposal for it? Where's the declaration that white supremacists are terrorists? Where are the Democrats at to push laws criminalizing the teaching or promotion of white replacement theory in the schools or in places of business? The government's going after rappers using RICO statutes because of their rap lyrics. Now, where's the RICO prosecution against Tucker Carlson or Christopher Rufo for the violence that their rhetoric inspires? Who is even calling for it? There's practically nothing from the white left yesterday or today that was actually about black people. All these Democrat politicians and pundits, these Congress people and senators, sure, they had the same trite, meaningless words of sympathy and concern, but not a single word about punishment, not a single word about locking anyone up, not a single word about waging war on them, nothing about what consequences are going to be inflicted on them. Whatever laws are on the books need to be tougher and stronger. Nobody talking about that. Nobody talking about reinforcing the law. See, if these were black people we're talking about, then they'd be saying whatever laws are on the books, we need to add some laws if we ain't got them, and if we got laws on the books, we got to make them 10 times tougher. That's what it would be. But since these are white race terrorists we're talking about, since these are white suspects we're talking about, well, twiddling thumbs, nothing we can do. We're certainly not going to be talking about reinforcing any laws, making anything tougher. I mean, we have to actually lock up some of these white supremacists, and we're not going to do that. Chuck Schumer was on Twitter yesterday saying that he ached for the victims and their families. He ached for Buffalo. He ached for the East Side community. Listen up, Chuck Schumer. I don't want to hear about your doggone arthritis. You need to be talking about white supremacy and what you're going to do to punish it, full stop. If Democrats were serious, they'd take this moment to go after white replacement theory the same way Republicans ginned up phony hysteria about critical race theory. Because unlike CRT, which most people hadn't even heard of until late last year, Republicans have publicly signed on to white replacement theory and supported it, like Elise Stefanik did. Democrats could easily confront them on this. They could be easily running to the state legislatures and saying we need laws to criminalize even mentioning white replacement theory because talking about white replacement theory is a pretext to mass murder. Throw the GOP into disarray, as they all try to run away from the very white replacement theory that just yesterday morning they were all champions of. The GOP can't afford to defend white replacement theory, not now. They can't, and at the same time, they can't afford to abandon it either, because it's been a signature GOP talking point. But these white Democrats, they're not going to do that, and they won't, not because they think it won't work, but precisely because they know it would. The Democrats' top priority is not winning office, it's upholding and maintaining white supremacy at all costs. This is why no matter how many schools or churches or grocery stores get shot up by white domestic terrorists, the Democrats won't do anything no matter how many seats they have in the House or the Senate. You could give Democrats 100% of the seats in the House and the Senate. They still wouldn't do anything. And the reason why has nothing to do with the NRA per se. The Democrats are caught on the horns of a dilemma. And this dilemma doesn't allow them to have any easy ways off those horns. The system this country operates under was created to cater to the interests and whims of white supremacists. And part of this is ensuring veritable immunity from law. You can't have a system of superiority unless there's a group who cannot be touched by the law. If everyone's equal under the law, then you have no supremacy. You have no perks for being white if that's the case. And it is this system of racial goodies, giveaways, and guarantees that acts as the glue that holds the beneficiaries of white privilege together. That's why they have to maintain it. This is the tie that binds. This is the thing that keeps them all on the same page. Real, tangible, material benefits. You have a scrape with the law, don't worry. You're white, so nothing's going to happen to you. Oh, you say you're going to shoot up your school? Nothing's going to happen to you. Now, you got that black child over there. Some teacher said the kid looked at him the wrong way. You're walking out of here in handcuffs. We're going to try to put a case on you. The truth is, they, both the white left and the white right, they get a lot from white supremacy. In fact, they get everything from it. They're so dependent on the continuation of that system that if faced with a choice between preserving white supremacy or preserving their own children's lives, they've already made the choice. Sorry, Scooter Jr., you and the rest of the kiddies are done for. We got to protect white supremacy. Boulder, Colorado, Parkland, Sandy Hook, the bodies keep piling up. And they're not going to do anything about it because they're much more concerned about maintaining that white supremacist principle. The same white supremacy and white privilege that Payton Gendron relied on to keep him from going to prison last year, the same white privilege that allowed him to get his hands on guns and be taken alive after he committed a mass murder, it's the same white privilege that Chuck Schumer and every white member of the Democratic Party and the white left also depend on for every crumb of their daily bread. It's not just the Republicans here. These white Democrats depend on that system of racial goodies, giveaways, and guarantees too, as much as the Republicans do, as much as Payton Gendron did. The same economic, social, and legal chain that connects Payton Gendron to his white privilege is also the same chain that connects these white leftists to theirs, just like the Republicans. They can't pull against the Payton Gendrons or any of these other white supremacist terrorists because they're all moving in the same direction. But the white left and the white right are both playing games on this for their own purposes. Yesterday, most of these white leftists were on Twitter trying to find some way, however ridiculously convoluted, to connect this mass murder of black people to their favorite pet issue du jour of abortion. Others were talking about gun control. None of them said a word about white supremacy. All of them were talking about the 2022 midterms, however. So as far as they were concerned, this was going to be used to get out the vote, especially the black vote. Now, the Biden administration decided to do a quick little CYA. They jumped in front of the cameras for a hot minute and announced that they're going to be investigating this as a hate crime. That's encouraging, isn't it? Because the last time the Biden DOJ was handling a hate crime case was just 10 days ago with Derek Chauvin. And they helped to cover for a judge who gave him a concurrent sentence with his state time, which basically means the federal case equates to no prison time for that animal at all, which was the entire goal for the Biden DOJ. And before that, just a few months ago, Biden's own DOJ was fighting in open court against the family of Ahmaud Arbery, trying to make sure that Ahmaud's killers got a slap on the wrist. And when the family challenged this plot to derail justice by Biden's DOJ, Kristen Clark, the so-called head of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, led the charge to tell the judge to ignore the family of Ahmaud Arbery because that would give them peace. When Merrick Garland, the corrupt and racist attorney general, was questioned about how his office fought the family's wishes, he gave a few feeble, empty, and insincere words about how sad it all was, and then he went on to his next question. Naturally, the white media didn't press him about it. This is one group of white supremacists showing professional courtesy for another. Joe Biden's White House put out a mamby-pamby empty statement. He might as well have said nothing at all. And speaking of saying nothing, Biden didn't mention the word black even once in his empty, do-nothing pile of words salad. He just spoke in the most vague of terms, just like Elise Stefanik did. Don't say black. 10 people. Victims. That's how he spoke about them. Didn't say black even one time. He gave a passing mention to white nationalist one time, and then at the very end of this pile of words salad, he threw in one pitiful mention of domestic terrorism. And that was it. And he made sure to keep those two terms separated. And of course, he didn't say what, if anything, he was going to do about it, which told you everything he's going to do about it. Hate must have no harbor. That's a slogan, not a policy proposal. But just like Elise Stefanik, Biden made sure to mention the police, who, by the way, did absolutely nothing to stop Payton Gendron last year when they had the chance. And they weren't hurt yesterday at all. They showed up after this carnage was already finished. So what the hell are you doing sending out any wishes to them? They weren't hurt. And they're the reason that this happened. They could have stopped it, but they didn't. And just to double down on the contempt, Biden's Twitter earlier today posted an invitation for everyone to join him and that hag he calls his wife as they honor all the police who died in 2021. The same police who had Payton Gendron in their custody a year ago, but didn't do anything about him. The same police who could have arrested Kyle Rittnehouse after he attacked that girl last year and stopped the bloodshed in Kenosha, but didn't do that either. The same law enforcement who could have stopped Dylann Roof before he went on his rampage, but didn't do anything about that either. That's who Biden is saying we need to be honoring right now. In fact, that's what Biden has spent most of his time devoted to. He needs to be talking about the police. Need more money for the police. Hell, he's gone so crazy, he's just openly come out and said, hey, you know all that COVID money that we put out there? You know how we were kind of hinting that we wanted to allocate some for the police? Well, you cities and states, you should take that COVID money and spend it on police instead. Don't worry about the COVID thing. COVID's going to be fine. But you need to be taking all that COVID money and give it to the police instead. Now, isn't that malfeasance? Isn't that misappropriation of funds, using it for something that has nothing to do with what the funds were given for? No. When it comes to propping up the enforcement arm of white supremacy, malfeasance is no longer a crime. But this is what Biden's about. Black people dying, and the only thing on his mind is we got to reinforce the enforcement arm of white supremacy. So we see that Elise Stefanik and Joe Biden, they're on the same page. Oh, this is all about giving a pat on the back to law enforcement. And we're going to speak in the most vague of terms about the victims because we don't want anyone thinking that we're actually giving any concern to black people, mind you. And things don't get any better when you start looking at New York statewide. New York's two highest profile black prosecutors, Alvin Bragg in Manhattan and Letitia James, went on an orgy of press releases and political theater when there were attacks against Asians in the news. Alvin Bragg himself announced that he wanted to bolster his office's hate crimes task force, but not to protect black people, rather to respond to the number of attacks against Asians. Letitia James made a big show of setting up a hotline, but specifically for Asians. And she said she wanted to take the lead in tackling anti-Asian violence. The white supremacists saw that New York's most high-profile black prosecutors were saying nothing about black people, and the white supremacists correctly interpreted this as giving them the green light to attack us. No anti-black violence bills being pushed by your black politicians in New York or anywhere else. No task forces to stop anti-black race attacks at all. Even in the face of yesterday's mass murder, Letitia James is still doing everything that she can to minimize any mention of black people. This image pretty much says it all, I think. On Friday, Letitia James had been congratulating Karine Stank-Pierre, of all people, for being Biden's appointed spokesliar. And then yesterday, all she could manage to do was to give one measly, feeble little tweet saying that 10 people, not black people, but just 10 people, were killed by a white supremacist. Then, like Chuck Schumer and Biden, she spouts some empty talk about mourning their loss, resist hate, people's skin color, and then at the very, very end, she says she prays for the day when being black is no longer a reason to be killed. She leaves black at the very end as an afterthought. Black people are being murdered in her state, and all Letitia James is offering black people are her thoughts and prayers. I'm going to pray for you. I'm not going to do anything for you, but I'm going to pray for you. Because apparently that's her idea of how you deal with anti-black violence. For everybody else, we got a hotline, we got a task force, we got prosecutors, we're going to be pushing for new laws, but for black people, you need to pray about it. That's what she literally wrote. I'm going to pray. Black folks are being killed, well, I'm going to pray for the day when that stops happening. And if I pray about it, then magically it will stop. Gee, if only Letitia James held some position of power and authority in New York State. You know what? I got an idea. If only Letitia James was the Attorney General, then she could prosecute animals like the one who carried out the massacre yesterday, prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law, and go after all of his other white supremacist buddies as well. Yeah, if only Letitia James was Attorney General of New York, then she'd do something. Oh, wait. And by the way, for the non-black people, the white people in particular who listen to my videos, please don't think that your white elected leaders are going to do anything about this, especially not those on the right. These racial mass murders are what they want. The entire point is to promote a psychopathically violent white supremacist mob who is going to force white rule on the country through open, unambiguous violence. This is what all of this phony white hysteria has been meant to prompt and to move a critical mass of white supremacists in the society towards. This is what Christopher Rufo and the Manhattan Institute and Fox News and Bill Maher have wanted for the longest time. This has been what they've wanted all along. You won't be able to maintain white rule in the U.S. any other way because the rationale, the lie for the last 130 years since the end of Reconstruction has been that whites dominate the government and business and resources because they're the majority. Why, that's just the natural result of being the majority in a country. They've told that lie so long that to them it's become a legitimate truth, or at least it's something that they reach for first. Well, now the demographics of the country are shifting. Whites will inevitably become a minority. There's no way to stop it. They establish the standard that the majority race is going to have the wealth and the power, and the minority race will not. They justified that idea and defended it and wagged their fingers in everyone's faces about it. So as they see their numbers declining, they understand that the very rationale they use to justify their monopolization of resources and shutting others out is now about to be turned on them. And the worst part is they spent over a century justifying it. See, the leadership of white society, be they on the left or the right, they don't see these white supremacist gunmen as being a problem at all. For the Ron DeSantises and the Greg Abbotts, the Dylann Roofs and Payton Gendrons and Kyle Rittenhouses, they are the well-regulated militia. That's what they want. White males who will kill without compunction, without hesitation. Hey, after all, you can't count on Derek Chauvin and Daniel Pantaleo to be everywhere. That's what all the white hysteria about critical race theory and great replacement theory and all the other asinine white supremacist theories they keep spouting on are meant to produce. Get them mad or get them scared about something, give them a wink and a nod and let them know, hey, this is the rationale to use, we got your back. But the question is not what the racists like Jim Crow Joe are going to do. They've already given us the answer. Nothing. The question is, what are we going to do to make sure that our neighborhoods, churches, schools, places of worship, and even grocery stores are not soft targets for white supremacist race terrorists? The first thing you can do is get comfortable with carrying the implements of self-protection, because we need them more than anyone else. Recognize that most of the people in government and law enforcement are allied with, if not extremely sympathetic towards, these race terrorists. That's the reason why every time one of these massacres happens, we always immediately find that the killer had close and deep ties with law enforcement, the same law enforcement that both Elise Stefanik and Joe Biden are praising and promoting right now. So they will work to protect them until they carry out an attack, as happened with Dylann Roof and this Payton Gendron creep, and they'll also work to protect them from punishment afterwards. You have a right to protect yourself, as does every other black person. These race terrorists are not just popping up out of the ground. They are indoctrinated, coddled, armed, and protected by a racist system that sees them as its unofficial foot soldiers. So what's called for is for us to get serious about the matter. If you're in the middle of an empty field and you don't have anything to eat, you better produce some food or you're going to die. If you're out in the bitter cold and you don't have anything to wear, you better produce some clothing or you're going to die. And when you're living under white supremacy and you're being subjected to state-sanctioned violence, you better get comfortable with producing justice. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Anthony Cooper, Brian Intugoku, Maurice Johnson, Douglas Shaw, and Bobby Williams. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.